The cameras were already rolling inside a grand U.S. Senate hearing room. The atmosphere was heavy. News crews packeted corners. Security stood stiff against the walls, and every chair was filled with senators, generals, and global observers. Flags hung behind the raised bench like silent judges. Then Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked in. He wore his simple military uniform from Burkina Faso, back straight, chin high, but ice calm. He wasn't just here as a soldier. He was invited to speak into African security. But just as he adjusted the microphone, a loud voice cut through the air. "You're not welcome here." Everyone turned. A senator stood up, face red, finger pointed at Trump. "You don't belong at this table." Gasps, murmurs. A reporter dropped a pen. Security moved. 2 guards approached slowly. The silence was crushing. Cameras zoomed in. A woman in the back wiped a tear. Even the lights seemed to dim. But Trump didn't move. He stood still, hands gently resting on the microphone. And with the whole world watching, he didn't flinch. Not yet. The tension was unbearable. Senators whispered among themselves. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched Traoré with thinly veiled contempt. Butine, the far corner of the room. A child's photo set on a journalist's lap, which showed a little girl from Ouagadougou holding a sign that read, "My president, my hope." That image didn't make the news that night, but it sat right beside the live feed. The security men drew closer. One placed a hand lightly on Trump's arm, but he still didn't move. Then, slowly, he raised his head. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it cut through air like thunder wrapped in silk. "I did not come here to be welcomed. I came here to speak for the forgotten." The guards froze. The senator who shouted blinked just once, but something in his face changed. The room shifted. A woman. Senator placed her pen down. A general leaned forward. A journalist mouthed, "Wow." Traoré continued, voice steady, words deliberate. "If you fear my words, perhaps you fear the truth." Click, click, camera snapped. Outside, a small crowd began to gather. Inside, history was quietly beginning to write itself. The guards looked at the senator, unsure. He gave no signal. Traoré was still standing untouched. He looked at the cameras now. "You invited me here," he said softly, "but not to listen." His words struck deeper than anger. I embarrassed those who expected him to shrink. One of the guards, young, maybe two, stepped back. He looked at Traoré, then at the senator, and his hands trembled slightly. Across the room, someone was crying quietly. It was a black congressional staff. She'd grown up in D.C., but her roots were in Mali. To her, Traoré wasn't just a man in uniform. He was dignity, resistance, memory. The senator tried to kick Trump out. Finally spoke again, but his voice cracked. "The sharing is for allies of the United States." Trump turned toward him, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. "Truth. And yet I see. Weapons who sent that tore apart my village. So tell me, which kind of ally are you?" A few in the audience gasped. The senator's mouth hung open. Then someone clapped, one clap, then another, then silence again. Traoré still hadn't moved. Silence. Not the normal kind. This one hurt. It screamed. Without making a sound, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood in the center of the Senate floor. The room around him was packed with American senators, military brass, and foreign policy experts. Yet, not one person support him. The camera zoomed in. A security guard took another step closer. The same senator who barked, "You're not welcome here," now motioned toward Theodore. His face was hard, proud, but in his eyes there was a flicker of fear. Fear that this African leader wasn't afraid. Traoré looked down for just a second. Then slowly, he picked up the folder he had brought. It held only 5 handwritten pages. He handed it to the guard. "I am not allowed to speak," he said calmly. "Let history speak for him." The guard looked confused. Traoré to walk away, but then stopped. This hearing invited voices from nations who called partners, but when truth can mean a uniform you didn't give, you rejected it. The room was breathless. The senator's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, because the truth had already landed, and it hurt outside the Senate building. A little girl sat on a bench beside her mother. She clutched a homemade sin. Burkina Faso is not alone. Inside, that same message echoed in the quiet hearts of a few watchers, staffers, reporters, even a young marinette. The door. Back in the chamber, Traoré remained still. One senator, an older woman from Minnesota, leaned toward her mic, but paused, her eyeswear on truer, not his uniform, but his fast.com, steady, human. Suddenly, a journalist whispered, "He's not going to fight back." Another murmured, "He's not scared." Then Traoré did something unexpected. He looked directly into a camera. "There is a girl in my country," he said softly, "who walks 5 miles to school each morning, not for power, not for praise, but to learn. I came here to speak for her." The room stirred. Some senators shifted uncomfortably. If this chamber cannot hear a voice from Africa, then what is it really hearing? The journalist in the front wiped away a tear. Outside, the little girl's mother pointed to the screen. "He's talking about you." A sound broke the silence. It wasn't a voice. It was a tear. A single drop slid down the cheek of Senator Lawrence Mitchell. The very man who had shouted, "You're not welcoming her." He tried to hide it, quickly, rubbing his face with a tissue, pretending it was nothing. But the cameras caught it. The world saw it, and in that moment, the whole world felt it. Traoré hadn't raised his voice. He hated pointed fingers. He hated stormed out. He had just spoken with dignity. And dignity makes powerful men tremble. The security guard who had been ordered to escort him out, he lowered his hand. "Sir," the guard whispered, You can stay." No one objected. Traoré took a step forward. He was calm. Botu could feel the storm behind his eyes. Not anger, not pain, purpose. "You called me a threat," he said, "but what I carry are not weapons. I carried stories you've refused to hear." The room was silent again, but this time not from pride. It was shame, and in shame, they finally began to listen. In a small apartment in New Jersey, an 11-year-old African girl named Eminata watched the Senate hearing live on YouTube. Her father, a cab driver from Burkina Faso, had told her to watch the man who never bows. She sat cross-legged, eyes locked on the screen. When she saw Traoré being told to leave, her chest tightened. When he stayed calm, she sat up taller. Then he said, "There is a girl in my country who walks 5 miles to school." Amanatata gasped. Her father dropped the dish. He was holding it, shattered, but he didn't even flinch. "He's talking about you," he whispered back in the chamber. Traoré raised his eyes slowly. If this room cannot find space for an African voice, perhaps thrilled outside these walls will. Outside the capital, crowds were beginning to gather. Online, millions begging, sharing the live stream. And in that tiny Jersey apartment, a girl who felt invisible suddenly felt seen. For the first time, Eminata wiped a tear from her cheek, not out of sadness, but pride. Inside the Senate chamber, Senator Mitchell sat frozen. The same man who had shouted, "You're not welcome here," now stared down at his lap. In his hand, he held a folded photograph. No one noticed it except him. It was a and white picture from 1984. It showed a young Mitchell in a small West African village standing beside a boy with no shoes and a bright smile. That boy had been his interpreter during a Peace Corps visit. His name Ibrahim. He looked again. Same eyes, same quiet straight. He realized he had tried talking out the same boy who once helped him find his way home through a rainstorm in Burkina Faso. His hands, he stood up slowly. "The room to test, Mr. True," he said, voice shaking. "Do you remember a small village called Sapui?" Traoré blinked. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You gave me water," Mitchell said. "And you walked me across a broken bridge. No one else would." Gasps rippled across the room. A few senators looked at each other, unsure what to do. The cameras didn't blink, and the world leaned closer to their screens. Senator Mitchell stepped away from his seat, paper still in his hand. The entire chamber was silent, as if holding its breath. "Captain Traoré," he said, "I forgot who you were. I forgot your name, but I never forgot how you made me feel that day." Traoré remained still. "Not out all fright, but from the weight of memory. You carried my bag, You shared your bread, and you called me brother. A voice from the back of the room suddenly whispered. He still does. It was the young Marine Guard. Senator Mitchell Shand dropped to his side. Maybe I didn't want to remember that an African children's saved me. Maybe I didn't want the world to see that the strong one in the room wasn't me. Someone sniffled. A woman in the gallery wiped her tears. A cameraman zoomed in on Traoré's face, still calm, but now with a glint of emotion behind his eyes. Mitchell took a deep breath, then helped across the floor and said what no one expected. Brother, please speak. The room exploded in gasps, and Captain Traoré finally stepped forward. Not as a soldier, but as a voice the world had long refused to hear. The silence after Senator Mitchell's words felt heavier than the insult that came before it. Brother, please speak. The phrase echoed like thunder in a Captain Traoré stepped forward with slow grace. Every camera in the room followed him. The world, watching from phones and TVs, leaned in, helpless, both hands on the wooden table before him, and looked around, not just at the senators, but at the staff, the guards, the reporters. Thank you, he said, but I will not speak for myself. I will speak for the mothers who buried their children after American drones dropped missiles on their villages. A few in the room looked down. A general stiffened. Someone coughed nervously. I will speak for the farmers who harvest dust, because foreign companies dug up earth for gold and left nothing behind. Mitchell's face tightened, not in anger, but in shame. You called me unwelcome, but I am nother for welcome. I am here for truth. Traoré's voice never rose, but it shook the room. No one dared to interrupt, not this time, because deep down they all knew he was right. Thousands of miles away in the dry outskirts of northern Burkina Faso, a woman named Mariam watched the live stream on a borrowed wad phone. Her son had died 3 years earlier when their village was caught in crossfire during a military operation. No one apologized. No one came back. But no, this man, her president, was saying what no one else ever had. She fell to her knees on the hard clay floor. She pressed her forehead to the ground. God, she whispered through tears, you did not forget us. Back in the center room, Traoré paused. You created Depozel, and then blamed the people trying to survive it. He turned to one of the senators who had previously mimicked African leaders. I did not come here to beg. I came to remind you that every bomb dropped leaves behind a name, a face, a story. At that moment, across the world, my tears hit the floor like a prayer. And for the first time, people in power were being forced to listen, not with their ears, but with their hearts. From the back of the room, General Raymond Clark watched quietly. He had spent years in West Africa, years commanding operations, years following orders, and for the first time, he saw not an enemy, not a soldier, but a man, a son, a brother, a leader. His own memories came flooding back. He remembered a dusty road, a boy in tattered clothes helping lift an injured American soldier into a truck. That boy was Traoré. He had saved lives even before wearing a uniform. General Clark cleared his throat and the cameras shifted. Captain Traoré, he said, you once saved me man's life in 2005. His name was Corporal Rai. He made a tome because of you. Traoré didn't respond. He simply nodded gracefully. I failed to speak for you today, the general said, but if you'll allow me, I will not stay silent any longer. The Senate chamber was no longer a battleground. It was a confession booth, a place where power had finally met truth, and millions around the world felt their hearts swell with something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Downstairs, inside the Senate media room, phones were going wild. Producers shouted over each other. Rewind that part, when he said, you blame the people trying to survive. That line. Cut it and post it now. Social media exploded. Within 15 minutes, your trial speaks waste trending in 27 countries. In Ghana, kids gathered around an old TV to watch their play. In Nigeria, university students sat quietly, fists clenched. In France, a retired soldier who once served in Burkina Faso wiped his eyes. I met this man when he was a boy, he whispered to his daughter. Even then, he had that fire in his eyes. Upstairs, in the Senate chamber, Trey stepped back from the podium. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't expect forgiveness. He simply said, "I was not born to make you comfortable. I was born to speak for those who never got their chance." The audience didn't clap. Not yet. But they sat taller, straighter, changed. Because this wasn't just a man talking. It was Africa. Standing without apology, Captain Trey reached inside his jacket slowly. Security flinched. But instead of a folder or paper, he pulled out Asmel folded envelope. He unfolded it gently and held it up. "This," he said, "is a letter from a 13-year-old girl in Burkina Faso. Her name is Binta." He opened the letter and began to read, his voice soft, almost like a prayer. "Dear President Traoré, if you ever meet leaders of the world, please tell them I don't want to be rich. I just want to be safe. I just want to grow up." By the end of the second line, two senators were visibly weeping. "Please tell them, we're not dogs, we're not dark. We're not darkness. We are just far away." Trey stopped. He looked up, and for the first time since entering the chamber, his voice cracked. "She doesn't know about geopolitics," he said. "She just wants to grow up." The room was completely still. No one blinked. No one moved. Because in that moment, the hearing had stopped being about policy. It had become about people. And Binta's letter, her pain, was now the world's burden to carry. In the top left corner of the Senate chamber hung a massive American flag. And beneath it, something happened no one could explain. One single drop of water hit the fabric. It wasn't from a leak. It wasn't from the ceiling. It had fallen from someone's. Senator Grace Whitmore, one of the most powerful voices on the Foreign Relations Committee, had leaned forward, her forehead resting on her clasped hands, and she was crying openly for the first time in her 27-year career. When she raised her head, her mascara had run, but her voice was clear. "Captain Traoré," she said, "I've spent my life making decisions about countries I never visited, but today, I feel like I've finally met one." She stood up. So did General, then the staffers, then the crowd in the back. It was not applause, it was respect. One by one, they stood. But Traoré, he just stood still. Not proud, not angry, just real. Because Hayden come to conquer. He came to be heard, and now, finally, he was. As Captain Traoré stood in front of the U.S. Senate, the world watched, but not silently anymore. In Kenya, school children stood and saluted their top screen. In Haiti, a teacher played his speech in her classroom. She cried so hard, she had to pause the video. In Atlanta, a black teenager tweeted, "I never knew who Ibrahim Traoré was. But no, he's who I want to become." The U.S. Senate gallery was still standing. The senators didn't know what to do. There was no rule book for this moment. But Senator Whitmore stepped forward and did something never seen in Senator's history. She walked across the floor and stood beside him. "Captain," she whispered, "the chair is yours." Then she handed him her microphone. Cameras flashed. Reporters gasped. The senator, who once shouted, "You're not welcome," was now frozen in disbelief. Traoré didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply stepped forward, adjusted thematic, and took the seat they once denied. And in that moment, he didn't just represent Burkina Faso. He represented very forgotten voice the world once refused to hear. Traoré's voice was calm, low, but through it of his words was like thunder. "This seat is not mine," he said. "It belongs to every child digging through dust for clean water, to every mother who wraps her baby in silence, daring in fire, to every man still standing with nothing left to stand on." He paused. No one dared to interrupt. "I came here not to blame. I came to do." He looked around right into the eyes of the men who had tried to push him out. History is not written by those who speak loudest. It is written by those who are still standing when no one claps. The room was full, but it felt like a church, a spiritual silence. A young staffer in the back, barely 19, sobbed quietly into his hands. A military veteran nodded slowly, tears flowing. "You may forget this moment," Traoré said, "but millions will not, because the world just saw the truth." He folded Binta's letter again, kissed it once, and tucked it into his pocket, and with one final look at the chamber, he whispered, "Thank you for finally listening." Then he stood, and the entire chamber and the world rose with him. The Senate hearing adjourned, but the fire had just begun. That night, Traoré's response was replayed over 92 million times across platforms. Journalists called it the speech of a century. African leaders called it the turning point, and millions of everyday people simply called it hope. Ben's letter was published on the front page of the New York Times. In Burkina Faso, families gathered around radios and tab screens. No one talked, and when it ended, people walked outside and hugged. Some cried, some danced, but everyone felt different, because one man had spoken, and he hadn't spoken for himself. He spoke for them, for us, for you. If this story moved you even a little, if your got tight, if your eyes filled up or your throat felt heavy, then tell Maine the comments how it made you feel. Click like if Trey inspired you. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that speak truth and light up the world. Let's make sure the whole world hears what dignity really looks like. Because one voice rises millions.